Geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, presented by Black Stack Brewing, your friendly neighborhood merchants. I'm John Bonus of Twins Daily. With me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
It is, what time where you are? 5 a.m.?
6 a.m. 6 a.m. in Coolangatta Beach in Australia, and 2 p.m. in Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Yeah, in lovely northeast Minneapolis.
What is the temperature there today?
I don't leave the house. It is.
It's always 70 and shady where Aaron Gleeman lives.
No, 68. It is 14 degrees here, but let me tell you something, John. It's sunny, so don't
that's nice.
factor that into you.
That's good. Yeah.
We had to get together because there's so much new. Well, no. Not much news. I was thinking now, we joke about how little the Twins do.
I picked the right off season to be bopping around like an idiot across the globe. No question about that.
Well, it would have worked last off season too. That's the amazing thing, really. We're really at like 18 months, I would say, of nothing. Because the previous trade deadline, they also did nothing.
You're right.
So since I want to get the years right here because it's fresh. It's a fresh year, John.
Yes, it's mid 2023.
Yeah, it's also my birthday.
Yes,
just so everyone knows. I don't know why people need to know that. I barely need to know that.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so we really
you don't look
fought
very
the
young.
odds.
Look very young for 50. It's amazing. I'm really impressed.
I don't feel good for 50, John. Even though I'm 42, I feel bad for 70. I imagine. But anyway, that's a story for another day. It's really been, like, obviously this offseason the Twins have done, like, almost literally nothing. We're going to talk about the few scraps of interest that we have that we can talk about here. It's mostly people leaving the Twins is actually the most interesting parts, which we'll get to in a moment. But last offseason they did nothing. I mean, that was sort of the talking point when the payroll cuts were kind of halted all momentum and changed their strategy from a front office standpoint and all that. But also they did nothing at this past trade deadline. They acquired Trevor Richards, basically.
Right.
But then I was just trying to think, like, when's the last time we had action? If you go back to the 2023 trade deadline, I can't even remember the right-handed pitcher. I'm blanking on his name that they acquired for Jorge Lopez.
That's right.
Dylan Floro.
Right.
Sorry, Dylan. Made a real impression. Actually had a good year for the Nationals or something, I want to say. But that was really the only move they made at that deadline. And we've ceased being, I don't know, surprised or confused by the lack of action.
It kind of gets us back into like the Terry Ryan era. But even this is dead for the Terry. This is dead even for the Terry Ryan era.
At least make trades a lot. Actually, Terry Ryan, I would say, made a lot of trades, relative to payroll and all that stuff. He often would try to trade for prospects, which the Twins don't really necessarily do, trade veterans for prospects.
Right.
But Terry Ryan, it's not that Terry Ryan didn't make free agent signings. I mean, I'm not saying they made like a ton of free agent signings. They made, a fair number, I would say, a few every offseason. They were just such low wattage, low upside often, especially early on in the tenure. This time, I mean, they've literally done nothing this offseason, almost. The two past trade deadlines, they've essentially just acquired a random middle reliever, by the way, both of whom were cut before the end of the season. And then going back to last offseason, they shed money. Last offseason, they had to trade Polanco just to sign Santana. They haven't shed any money this offseason yet. We still kind of expect that. But they're not adding anything. And the two very low wattage moves that we're going to discuss here, they made a trade and a minor league signing that we'll get to in a moment. First of all, those are, I mean, I think the trade is worth talking about, even if they were relatively busy. It's sort of an intriguing little, swap. But that trade for kind of a quad A first baseman catcher DH type in Mickey Gasper. Again, we'll get to him more in a second. And then the signing they made yesterday, which is not even really worth talking about under normal
We would
circumstances.
not normally talk about a minor league signing.
Yeah, I mean, we might say, oh, they picked up this guy.
Yeah,
whatever.
I don't remember us spending a lot of time on Willie Castro. We heard he ended up signing his way.
Yeah, well, we should have.
Yeah, we probably should have. You're right. You're right.
But Mike Ford, who people might recognize, he's spent, I don't know, 5 or 6 years in the majors bouncing around. But the fact that he's also a first baseman and they're lost Carlos Santana officially to the Guardians, which we'll talk about more in a second too, it makes me think. I do think they're going to make some trades because I think they got to shed some money. But beyond that, this whole, we've talked about like lower cost free agent first base options or trade options at first. But the more this goes, I mean, most of the even lower cost, semi appealing first base, Josh Bell types.
Right.
Well, he signed too for $6 million. Like Santana's off the board, Goldschmidt's off the board. Obviously, Pete Alonso's not coming here. Even the minor moves, the fact that both of the kind of semi-interesting minor moves they've made have been for first baseman, for kind of AAA or quad A first baseman, make me think, that it might just be kind of a hodgepodge at first base. Like give Jose Miranda some competition, or maybe give Miranda / Edward Julian some competition, and that's Mickey Gasper and Mike Ford instead of, I don't know, Justin Turner or something like that. So,
well, last spring when we talked about, or when the right-sized comments came out of ownership, right, on CCO, we talked a little bit about, we said even then, listen, we think this is bad news for this offseason, because this offseason we at least had hope. But next offseason, it looks like we're kind of hoping, maybe they are going to find another 5-10 million if they get the TV contract worked out and all this other stuff. Or maybe 10, 15 million, something like that. But last year, what we saw was kind of how this works, which was even to make a low wattage signing. Santana didn't end up being a low wattage signing, but he was a low wattage signing at the time. He was a $5 million.
5.2 million is, yeah.
Even to do that, we haven't seen this ownership group faced with the sort of payroll constraints that Terry Ryan seemingly leaned into, right? Even to get the Carlos Santana deal done, he had to trade away Jorge Polanco first.
Right.
Right. Like that's what freed up the money. He wasn't spending that money until he wasn't spending the $5 million until he freed up the $6 million by moving Polanco minus Sclafini's salary. Right. And as I am watching, guys that I thought even for a, somewhat kneecapped payroll situation get taken off the board, Josh Bell being a great example. Or Turner for that matter. I don't know what Turner's going to sign for, but it seems like they're not really in play until somebody takes on one of the contracts that we already are looking to move, or this we think they are looking to move right now. And without somebody doing that, you're not actually players at all. You're making trades and getting minor league guys. You're getting literally minimum, as small a contract room as you can get.
Yeah, non-guaranteed minimum salary or AAA salary.
Right.
It's weird too because I still think they're going to. I would like it if they didn't have to trade any salary. They're at 140, roughly right now.
Right.
But my understanding this whole time has been that they got to get to 130. I had Twins people tell me that in person to my face last. 3 months ago or something like that. But the problem is, like you pointed out, you go, okay, well, maybe they'll trade Vasquez and they'll go sign Josh Bell or Justin Turner. Bell's off the board, but just like as an example. And you can do that. And if we're being honest, it's not like these moves have to be made in chronological order.
Exactly. Which this team has seemed in the past to be open to. Like they've been patient on free agents and a lot of things like that. But
yeah, there's no mid off season salary check in now, unless you hand out signing bonuses that need to be paid at certain points. You're not paying these guys till the season starts. So like they could carry a $160 million payroll until February as long as they were confident that they were going to be able to shed, the 20 million or whatever, Vasquez, Paddock, fill in the blank, whatever it is. But the problem is that I think we're seeing now is, well, it could be one of two things. One, they're having some difficulty getting traction on salary dumping trades. Which we speculated about for months now, especially with Vasquez. Like, how much value does he even have? How much do you have to eat? Who's going to take 10 million on that?
Right.
We'll see. But beyond that, the second problem might be even if somehow you luck into, and I would consider it very positive development for the Twins, if they could shed the entirety of Vasquez's contract, that's 10 million. That just gets him to 130. Then there's
that's another point.
There's no room to do anything. So I think that's maybe what we're seeing. And, we do this every offseason with them where it's like, oh my God, they haven't done anything. Why haven't they done anything? Yeah. And then eventually they do something, although it didn't happen last offseason because of the circumstances of ownership slashing payroll. And that makes me wonder, is this not under normal circumstances? I do think that the Falvey-led front office bides its time, will end up spending the money they could spend, but the problem is they don't have money to spend. So that might be out the window now too, kind of the normal MO of the team of like, yeah, it's January, but we do this every January. We say they haven't done anything. What are they going to do? But normally we're doing that because we're saying, well, our understanding is they got about 28 more million to spend. How are they going to spend it? They're running out of ways to spend it, and they always find ways to spend it. Well, that's no longer the case. I mean, our understanding right now is they have negative 10 million or, roughly. So, I don't know.
It probably makes sense to wait. Listen, you're not talking about high impact guys here. Vasquez as a backup catcher or, moving a pitcher or something like that. These are not names that would be generally moved early in the offseason. These are names that, people take a second look after the free agent pool runs out at the middle of January and start saying, well, we can still go and get, so-and-so via a trade and just cover our base there. Right. So it might just very well be that all those moves are still going to happen. They're just going to happen late in the season. It's just that, again, which is something we've talked about over and over and over again with this front office, free agent pool is going to be empty at that point if you're looking for an impact bat to be able to just throw some of that money that you're saving after. And so as a result, you're coming up with contingency plans here.
Right. I think this is what they're doing. I mean, we saw it kind of with the bullpen last year. We've seen it at various times. They like to set a floor and take in, unconnected from everything, other circumstances, payroll, just, making a trade for a guy like Mickey Gasper or signing a guy like Mike Ford, whatever it is. I have absolutely no problem with those moves. I think those are both intriguing players who, under the right circumstances, with an opportunity, could be average-ish, platoon players or useful players. I have no problem with that as kind of your floor setting, goal there, which the Twins clearly value. I mean, they do that year after year, this front office. They like to put in place, whether it was having a, Tyler Austin at DH, and we were like, well, they're going to go with Tyler Austin. No, they're going to put Tyler Austin there, and then they're going to go and try to get Nelson Cruz. Right. We've seen it with the bullpen at times. We've seen it with the rotation at times. They like to make sure that they won't be left with nothing, and then they try to pursue, more appealing options. I don't know if that's actually going to happen. I think the floor setting might be just what we're left with here. And then I also started thinking, like, I mean, this is nothing new, but we hear from so many Twins fans, and it's hard to push back against the, why should I care? Like what?
Right. Of course.
Waiting for this thing to be sold. And just bigger picture, what is the effect of a team in a major market that is already trying to compete with Vikings, Wild, Wolves, Lynx, Gophers, et cetera, sorry for any teams I've left out there, for eyeballs. And not only are you behind several, maybe all at this point, of those teams on the field in the most recent season, but like, just what is the effect of going 18, 20 months without doing any move that anyone has any interest in, whether even trading away guys? Like, you know what I mean? I'm not saying those are like positive things, but they're of interest. They're things that people want to read about. They're things that people want to talk about. They're things that people go, oh, did you see the thing? The Twins have gone essentially 18 months since more than that, probably 20 months.
Right.
Since the offseason going into 2023, basically.
Yeah. Signing
Correa.
Correa.
Right. Since that. Which
Right.
it's funny to have the biggest moment you could
Right.
ever have, basically.
Right.
And then imagine at that point, like I just think, were you in Florida for that press conference or that? Yeah, it was Boris. I don't remember if you were there.
I don't think I was at that one. No.
I cannot imagine someone pulling me aside as I'm sitting there watching Correa and Boris and everyone else, and someone saying to me, 20 months, they're not going to do a damn thing after this.
Right.
I'd have been like, what do you mean? Of course.
Right.
Like, what? And I just wonder, like, what is the long-term, I mean, we're seeing what the short-term implication is, but like of just sort of checking yourself out of the limelight, like of the interest, like you're just not even in the rotation of fan interest. And look, I think we still have interesting things to talk about. That'll be up to everyone if these next 20 minutes have been interesting or not. But I'm not
basically,
saying,
welcome back to the first 8 years of this podcast, kids, except even less.
Yeah, we have a lot of practice with it.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's just a very strange, and I don't even mean it so much as a criticism of the front office, although certainly I do think at both trade deadlines, last offseason, this offseason, I would have attempted to be more active than they've been, but who knows how successful I would have been with that. But I do think there were some buttons they could have pushed there, and they haven't. So maybe I'm criticizing them a little bit, but I mean, this is clearly just an ownership thing. Like, we've been over 1,000 times.
It's clear even at the trade deadlines, they had payroll limitations that were absolutely impacting their ability to make some moves.
Right. I mean, I know they came out with quotes afterward and at the end of the season where Falvey was like, oh, we were never told we couldn't add payroll at the deadline. Well, yeah, I mean, okay. Like Becky didn't say to me last night, don't go and try to sleep with Rihanna tomorrow. Like, okay, yeah, I just kind of understood. Actually, I think she'd probably say go for it. But anyway, that's a separate. But I don't know. It's just a very strange thing to watch. And by the way, making moves are not always a positive thing. Look at my beloved Timberwolves.
Right. Yes.
But it is just very strange for a team to be like, yeah, we'll just check out of here for a solid year and a half, covering basically 2 seasons. We just won't do anything, good, bad, indifferent. Like, we're just going to do nothing.
Right.
The biggest move they have made since re-signing Carlos Correa in the spring of 2023, prior to the 2023 season, is, well, I guess the Polanco trade would probably be the biggest thing, which is the shedding of a contract, and then the Santana signing.
Right. Which could
I
be
mean, if we're being
the same
honest,
thing practically.
Right. That's a B-level move and a C-level move, maybe, in the grand scheme of baseball, something like that. So I don't know. We do have the 2 biggest pieces of news, really, in our world. Number one, our friend Paul Lambert,
yes,
his lovely wife Kelly, have welcomed a baby meat sauce.
Louis Lambert.
Louis Lambert, great name.
I love
Spelled
that.
like Louis Varland.
I love the alliteration.
So I know he listens, although maybe he's a little busier than he used to be, so maybe he won't be listening.
He might have some time on his hands.
That's true. Well, you're doing like that midnight feeding or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's right.
Pop this dumb discussion in your. So congratulations to the Lamberts.
Yes.
One of the meat sauce is one of both of our favorite people of all time, but the entire family is just a lot of very nice, good people.
Sure.
So congratulations to them.
Entire growing Lambert clan. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, it is a clan. It really is. I've met half of them maybe, and it's a lot, but they're all very nice. Yeah. My favorite is still Dav, his brother, but that's,
of course.
Sure. But
my
Becky,
favorite's Muppet. So,
well, okay, yeah, maybe. But because we have a similar, they are a Vikings Packers dual household.
Yeah,
obviously,
that's right. Yeah, right.
Which is what my household is, which has been interesting these last few weeks. But as soon as the baby was born, my Packers fan, who lives with me, Becky, said, well, what are they doing about the fandom of this kid? Like, that's an immediate thing they need to decide.
Yeah.
And so I've seen now from Meat Sauce's posts on Twitter what they're doing. They're just sort of evenly distributing purple
Wow,
stuff and green stuff, and maybe just letting this kid decide.
That's I think what's happening is they're being inundated with various gifts from both fan bases to try and
I would argue if the kid's born in Minnesota, it's a Vikings fan. But, whatever. I would also just say you got like at least 6 or 7 years till this kid cares about football in any sort of meaningful way, right? Like a 6 or 7-year-old. Let whoever's good at that point. That's the real competition.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
NFL is high stakes. It's $1 billion businesses and stuff. But the real stakes is, can we lure Meat Sauce's baby boy to Packers or Vikings? That's the other big piece of news.
By the way, I think hold it real quick though. I think that does tie into the Twins discussion, which is, that is we've talked a little bit about the decision to cut payroll and how they potentially have impacted, a generation of fans that were at the point where you are playing for hearts and minds. Once you are at the point where you are edge of in a competitive window at the edge of, championship caliber type team. And that's where they were a year and a half ago. And that's what they have given up to sort of futz around with this thing. So I'm sorry. What was the second biggest piece of news?
Do-Hyun Park, frequent guest on this show. And also right up there with Meat Sauce on the all-time favorite people list, at least as far as I'm concerned. I know you don't like Doe as a person.
No, I never liked him. No. Jeopardy snob. Jeopardy know-it-all.
That's right. Doe has announced his retirement from the Twins beat.
Yes.
Is transitioning to a different job with MLB.com behind the scenes, working on the StatCast product as sort of a developer and maybe writer sometimes and all that stuff. But
I wouldn't say he's Twins beat is the correct thing he retired from. Not necessarily, not baseball at all. Not necessarily Twins fandom. So maybe not even Twins writing, right? Maybe
I'll be surprised if he writes about the Twins. Well, we've talked about what a compelling product they are to write about, but
that's true.
So our hope is Doe has already gotten out of Dodge. He's no longer even a Minnesota resident at this point.
Yeah.
Our hope is we're going to have Doe on for sort of his exit interview.
Yeah,
because anybody on this beat knows you need an exit interview, not with the Twins, not with your employer, but with Gleeman and the Geek. You have to talk your way out of this thing, or we won't let you leave. I would prefer not to let Doe leave if I had a choice. Yes. I've been sitting next to Doe for about 500 hours, no exaggeration, per season for 5 years now. I've gotten very close to Doe, literally and figuratively, and it pains me for him to leave because, as I've talked about before, he's a much needed buffer, as I was with him, between me and Dan Hayes. And they announced that Matthew Leach is going to be his replacement. He was formerly, when I first started blogging, and you also, he was the Cardinals beat writer for MLB.com, like from 01 to, 13 or something like that.
Okay.
And then he stepped aside from the beat and did a behind the scenes role with MLB. I know he was an editor for a while and stuff like that. So he's dusting off the notepad, as if we still use notepads, but you know what I mean.
But he's dusting off the spreadsheet.
Well, we'll see. Doe leaves very big shoes.
Yeah, I know.
Not literally, but on the spreadsheet front. And I don't know enough about Matthew Leach to say whether he can fill those shoes. So we'll see. But yeah, congratulations to Doe, because I know this is something that he has been thinking about for a while and has been sort of weighing the pros and cons with for a while. And it's good for him, bad for us.
If you would like to listen to that exit interview, I would suggest you sign up for the Patreon. I can tell you, you only have to pay $1 an episode when we publish, and we haven't published in 3-4 weeks. Yeah. So you will not lose your shirt this off season on the Patreon. It's easy. We absolutely cover the breaking news. We do lots of interviews with people like the various beat writers, and including a lot of mailbag episodes where you can ask us questions or ask some of the other beat writers questions about the Twins or about ridiculous side items in their lives. So,
do you think Matthew Leach would have taken this job to replace Doe if he knew he would have to do an entry interview
right
with us. Or if he knew he'd have to sit next to me for like 500 hours every season. That's
the real painful, right?
As you see, that's a challenge. Before we get to actual Twins things, let's talk about, well, first of all, Blackstack, which is our presenting sponsor each week or each episode, not so much week anymore. Is that what you've missed most being overseas here, John?
So I did have a good hazy here in Coolangatta, but I am very excited that when I get back, not only will my fridge have a ton of Blackstack beer in it, Blackstack is also going to be the presenting beer sponsor for the Winter Meltdown, Aaron Gleeman. So we will be having some of their particularly good pale ale, hazy, I think, pale ale, Local 755. That's one of their flagship products. It's the one that I know just about everybody who is into beer absolutely loves from them. And also their Slopes Pilsner, which is another one that I love from Blackstack, which is a little more drinkable. But I mean, they have all kinds of other great ones. They got their Pull Tab Pale Ale is another big fan. Uncut Jam, Strawberry Rhubarb Sour. And now you can find them not just in their fantastic tap room, which we visited just before we left, and we'll probably visit once we get back, but you can also find them in your local liquor store because they have a whole new distribution and distributor relationship right now. And as such, they are in places everywhere. They're from Grand Marais to Rochester, Winona to Fargo. You can find Blackstack in your liquor store. And if you can't, just ask for them. But I think you're going to be able to find them. So take a look for it. It's usually kind of like a silver black can with a little bit of an accent of color on it. And look for that Blackstack Brewing. You're going to absolutely love their beer. People love their beer. That's what they do really, really well. Some places do advertising well and such. These guys don't. They just hire like 2 podcast guys to do it. They kind of mess that aspect up. But they do the beer well. So give a cut for Blackstack Brewing. So stop by Blackstack Brewing, which is near 94 and 280, or even easier, ask for them at your local liquor store.
Our second sponsor today is Acorns, and they're sponsoring the episode. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing so your money has a chance to grow for you, for your kids, for your retirement. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that fits you and your money goals. You don't need to be rich either. Acorns lets you invest with the spare change you've got right now. You can start with $5 or even just spare change. You don't need much time. You just create an Acorns account and you start investing. You can do it in 5 minutes. And it gives you sort of small, simple steps just to kind of put you in the right direction with investing a small amount of money.
We like places that get rid of obstacles. And if you are somebody who has been resistant to investing because it's a little bit scary, I would just recommend that you download the Acorns app and you give it a pull. You don't have to be in for a lot of money. You can make some mistakes in what you do and not feel like you're getting green. And frankly, it's just an easy way to put a little bit of money aside. Like Aaron said, you can literally just put your spare change from your investments right into Acorns and then have that be invested and see what happens.
You go to Acorns, that's with an S at it, acorns.com/Gleeman, or you can just download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future. Today, this is a paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Let's see. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. You can view important disclosures at acorns.com/Gleeman. Go there and start investing.
Tier 1 compensation provided. So,
all right. Sure. That means we got tier 1 compensation. You're holding on me, John. Tier 1.
That is correct. So,
okay. Let's talk a little bit about some actual Twins things, such as they are.
Let's talk about some guys who are probably going to be investing some of their money from other teams into this.
Good segue.
There you go.
Yeah. 3 exits, which Kyle Farmer had already exited, which leaves, I think they had 6 Major League free agents, which leaves Manny Margot is unsigned.
Okay.
And Anthony DeSclafani is unsigned.
Yeah.
Farmer signed with the Rockies probably a month or more ago. It was pretty quick, early in the offseason. And then now, since last we spoke, there's been 3 signings. Max Kepler signed a 1-year, $10 million deal with Chrissy's beloved Philadelphia Phillies, so she can continue to look at Max Kepler. I know that was a big hope for her that she wouldn't have to stop looking at Kepler, not so much as the player, but just literally just looking at him. Carlos Santana signed a 1-year, $12 million deal with the Cleveland Guardians, which he kind of goes back there. It's actually his third stint.
Yeah,
with the Guardians.
Did that number surprise you?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk more about that, but just put it this way in terms of surprise. Last year he was 37 years old, right around this time, and he signed a $5 million deal, $5.25 million deal with the Twins. Now he's 38 years old, and signed a $12.5 million or $12 million deal. So he's at 2.5 times the contract, despite aging a year. I guess it sort of speaks to. Well, it speaks to the type of season he had. He won his first Gold Glove, and he hit 23 homers. And after a horrible start, he was, legitimately an all-star caliber player for the last 5.5 months of the season or whatever. I think it probably speaks to the fact that the Twins got a pretty good bargain with him last time around.
For sure.
Although he had been coming off 3 pretty mediocre years at that point. And then the last one, Caleb Thielbar has signed. I didn't actually see the terms on this.
I haven't either.
I'm assuming it's a couple million maybe, with a 1-year deal, major league contract with the Chicago Cubs, which I don't think the Twins had any real, I don't want to say interest, but made no real effort to re-sign any of those 3 guys. The Kepler one, not surprising. I mean, I guess I would have been pretty surprised if we heard they had tried to re-sign Kepler. Santana, they love Santana, and he was a great signing for them. He's one of the only, like we've talked about at the beginning, one of the only positive moves they've made in the last year and a half. I think they would have loved him back, but like we talked about at the beginning of the show, it's not clear to me they even have $5 million to throw around. And when he's getting $12 million instead of $5 million, I mean, there was zero chance they were going to be in position, even if he wanted to return to Minnesota, as opposed to going to Cleveland for a third stint where he's played, 2/3 of his career now or whatever. Even if he wanted to stay in Minnesota, and even if the Twins were really motivated to bring him back at age 38 because of how good he was for them, $12 million was just, there's no way to, unfortunately, it's sad to say this, but there's no way to fit that money into their financial situation when they're already $8, $10, $12 million over their self-imposed payroll. With Thielbar, I think he's a Minnesota guy. He's a lifelong Twins fan, all that stuff. I think certainly he would have been open to returning to the Twins. My assumption is they kind of thought, well, good time.
And they could use a left-handed pitcher, just so we're clear.
Right, but part of the reason they could use a left-handed pitcher is I think they lost faith in him.
That's right.
38 or whatever. Although he did pitch well down the stretch. I'll give him that.
You're right.
And, the Cubs, that's not a bad spot to land for a 1-year deal. So good for him there. I think, the Kepler one, it's kind of that officially end of an era there. I mean, he was the last of the 3 signed in 2009. It was Kepler, Polanco, and Sano in the same international class. They were all 16 years old. Kepler from Germany, and then Polanco and Sano from the Dominican Republic. They all signed. The combined totals for that trio of international signings, which were actually technically, I guess, signed by the Bill Smith regime.
Yep.
In between Terry Ryan regimes, those 3 guys spent 42 calendar years in the Twins organization. Think about that. They played a combined 28 seasons for the Twins in the majors. That's counting brief call up for the beginning of their careers. And that trio combined for 2,598 games with the Twins, in the Twins uniform, not counting minor leagues, just major league. That's incredible. And, we can sit here and I feel like we had this conversation about Sano when he left 2 years ago. We had this conversation about Polanco when he left last offseason. And we had this conversation kind of in advance of Kepler, going back 2-3 months, or even at the end of the season when it became clear he was going to shut it down for the season because he was injured. We knew he wasn't going to be back. So we kind of tried to put his career in perspective. So we're not going to do that necessarily now, but That's incredible. For three guys you signed when they were 16 for a total of, well, let me do the math, about $4 million, less than $4 million in 2009 money. You got 42 years in the organization,
Right.
28 seasons in the uniform, and like basically 2,600 games. Two of them were all-stars, and then the one who wasn't an all-star, Kepler, played, lasted the longest with
Right.
the team. So I don't know that you could point to, well, it's weird because I think Kepler, when you sign a 16-year-old from Germany for 800,000,
Right.
which by the way is not a lot at this, Sano got 3.2 million at the same time.
Right.
So
Although
and he
that was a record amount, or not quite a record amount. It was close to a record amount at that time.
oh, the Sano, yeah,
Yeah.
3.2 million. I mean, it was actually Kepler's was the most ever, I believe, for a European player. It was
Right.
definitely the most ever for a German player, but that's
Right.
not really saying a whole lot. There's no way to look at that and say we signed a 16-year-old German kid. His parents are both at the Berlin Ballet. He was super raw. He was basically just an athlete at that time. And he ended up playing literally half his life, 15 years in the organization. He played, 10 seasons in the majors, all this stuff. Like, there's no way to look at that and not view that as an incredible outcome for that signing. I mean, you signed a 16-year-old and you got 16 years out of him, basically. But within that, I think, and this is true to some extent with Sano, but I think with Kepler, he had such a weird, I don't know, like lack of progression. Like he basically, as a rookie, when he was like 23, I think I want to say he was a rookie. He was kind of like an average or slightly above average all around corner outfielder. Like he was a little below average offensively for a corner outfielder, but a good defensive player. You add it together, it's, average everyday player. Well, when a guy does that as a rookie, when he's,
Right.
22, 23, you go, oh, wow. Well, if he can do that, right away, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, I bet you he'll develop, further. He'll add this, he'll add that. And that never really happened. Like, obviously, in 2019, he had a breakout year. Second half of 2023, he was phenomenal. But for the most part, he was kind of the same player at, 30 as he was at 23. And it's kind of
Wait, and you had the BABIP tease as well. Like
right.
every offseason, you take a look at, boy, he sure didn't seem to get very lucky on hits. And then it takes you, 3, 4. I mean, it took us half a dozen years, it seems, for us to recognize, no, he's just never going to get lucky at hits. He's not that kind of guy who, hits the ball particularly hard, or he manages to check every box such that, you're kind of hurting yourself on balls in play. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, and then they put the shift regulations in,
Right.
which I remember that was what 3 years ago, and everyone was like, "Oh, this is going to really benefit Kepler," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, I mean, it will. He's one of the most shifted players, and he's got a very rigid way of hitting that kind of produces the same type of balls in play over and over and over again. So he's pretty easy to defend, and so yeah, that will help him. That you can't shift directly into the spots he's going to hit the ball, but." I mean, we saw his batting average go up a little bit,
Right.
but he wasn't. It didn't make him more than an average-ish overall player. And there's nothing wrong with being an average-ish overall player, but it seems similar to me. He wasn't as good as Jose Barrios, but it seems similar to me to Jose Barrios in that Jose Barrios was terrible as a rookie, but then in his first full season, his second year, he was basically like a number 2, number 3 starter, and we thought, oh man, this guy's like 23. First full year, he's kind of, borderline top of the rotation type of guy, 180 innings, 3-something ERA. Imagine what he's going to be in 2 or 3 years. Well, it turned out what he was going to be in 2 or 3 years was basically the same player, good player,
Right.
better than Kepler probably. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with being an average player. It just was a very weird. I think Kepler's Twins career was so much more stagnation than development or improvement, and I think that became frustrating to try to figure out. And I know the Twins were somewhat frustrated by that over the years. And then, you toss in the fact that they played him every day, even though he's
Sure.
one of the worst hitters in Twins history against lefties. He was a good right fielder, but it became clear to the Twins that he was not really fond of filling in center field, which they needed, obviously, because Buxton's hurt every year. And after the first 3 or 4 years of doing that and doing it reasonably well, filling in. He made it pretty clear, like, I despised playing center field, so they stopped doing that. He became a very rigid player, not a bad player, but just like the things he did well never really grew,
Right.
and the things he either did poorly or had no interest in doing seemed to increase over the years. And also,
well, there was also the thing about
he was hurt a lot too.
You're right. Yeah, well, that's a good point. That's another good point. That was a frustrating aspect. I'll give you one more, which is just in terms of like fan perception. He always seemed to have almost one foot out the door. Now that isn't on him. But I can't think of another Twins player that was ever rumored to be on the trading block as much as Max Kepler, who was never actually traded. Right. I mean, we started talking about them potentially moving Max Kepler in 2019. I remember the offseason after that remarkable 2019 offseason. And we're like, okay, what do? They just got swept out of the playoffs again. And what are they going to do to kind of take that next step? And I think, the thought process was sort of, this was before we thought they would spend any money like on a Correa or something. But a lot of it was like, well, they're going to have to move somebody from this young core of good players. And it sure seems like Kepler's the fit for that. And then you had is it last year or 2 years ago I guess it was where it was just assumed. It's 2 years ago. It was just assumed he was off the team. Like they already had filled up. They'd signed Joey Gallo. They'd filled every corner outfield spot they could fill. And we were convinced that Max Kepler was not going to be on this team by opening day. And somehow he made it through to opening day.
Well, that one, I agree with all that. That one, they ended up trading a Rise, which changed the left-hand hitting component. Right. But I agree with all that. I mean, I'm as guilty as anyone, or more guilty than most, for writing trade speculation, or they should trade Kepler. I always tell the joke of, like, 3 off seasons ago, I walk into the Twins suite at the winter meetings, and a high-ranking Twins official, instead of saying hello, welcome to whatever, he said, "Boy, you really want us to trade Kepler, huh?" And like all the things you said, I just thought it was logical. I think what happened, though, and this kind of goes back to the stagnation, not improvement, and not growing from being an average player. I think what happened eventually was, by the time the Twins, like 2021-ish and on, the last couple off seasons certainly, by the time it was clear to the Twins, like, he's winding down here, we're probably not going to try to re-sign him. He's no longer like one of our best players, but he's solid. By the time it made sense for them, not just from a financial standpoint, but like, okay, we have Larnach, we have Wallner, we're ready to move on, or whatever. We have Kirilloff. Now, those guys weren't always as good. I mean, there's something to be said for being average every year. But by the time it made, like, more straightforward sense for them to actually trade him, I think his value across the league was pretty minimal. Like, I can tell you 2 off seasons ago, and certainly this past off season, I don't even really think they tried to trade him, because it was almost, it wasn't quite a Vasquez situation where they'd have to eat the money, but he was under contract for $10 million. And it was like, well, is Max Kepler much more than a $10 million player? Funny enough, that's precisely what he signed for as a free agent. Now, it was coming off a poor season, but it wasn't that much worse than previous seasons that he's had with the Twins. So I think part of it was,
it's almost like he got freezer burn with the rest of the league from being on the market. Yeah. I mean, the same way he kind of had freezer burn here,
Yeah, I think it just became more and more difficult, whether you're a Twins fan, whether you're the Twins themselves, whether you're another team that may have had interest in him. Because I can tell you, they had trade talks with him at trade deadlines going back 2 or 3 years, in off seasons. I mean, I know for sure of negotiations they had, but at no point were they ever going to be able to get a ton for him, in my subjective view. And I think we joked back then that the Twins were maybe overrating him, and that's subjective too. But I think what happened was, the last couple of years, it became tougher for teams to kind of talk themselves into Kepler still having upside, for all the reasons that we just discussed, because it was like, well, how come the Twins haven't ever been able to tap into this upside? And then eventually he becomes a free agent, and I'm not saying joining a contending team in Philadelphia is a bad thing or anything, but he got a 1-year, $10 million deal. I mean, that's certainly a whole hell of a lot less in both years and salary than we would have expected, 3 years ago, trying to project
For sure.
what his eventual free agency. And so I think the fact that he basically got the same money that he finished with the Twins, which was $10 million this past season, on a 1-year deal, even though he's only, I think he's 31 or something like that, I think speaks to that. It's like, well, being average has value, and I'm sure the Phillies see one or two things that they think they can try to tweak or tap into, and we'll see if they're more successful than the Twins at that. It wouldn't shock me if they were, but I just think the notion of him as having like considerable upside beyond just being a good, solid, everyday player is probably 2 or 3 years freezer burned, like you said. But I think it is interesting. So I was reading our Phillies writer Matt Gelb, who does a really nice job. I was kind of filling him in on Kepler a little bit. And then I read what he wrote after talking to Dave Dombrowski about the signing. They're going to play him in left field, at least as things stand now, because they have Nick Castellanos in right field, although they're reportedly trying to trade him. But they're going to play Kepler in left field, which he has literally never played in the majors. And the last time he started a game somewhere other than right field was 2021. So your preferences kind of go out the window when you're trying to find a 1-year deal for the most money, I think.
Sure.
And then the other thing of note is that it sounds like the Phillies are going to play him every day. And by the end, the Twins kind of ceased doing that. But for the majority of Kepler's career, 90% of it, I would say, with the Twins, he played every day. He played against righties and lefties, despite the fact that he very rarely was consistently good against lefties. And in fact, only Jock Jones and Nick Punto are worse, among guys who have at least 500 career at-bats against lefties with the Twins, have a lower OPS than Kepler. The excuse that I always assumed was, well, they didn't often have the ability to play all righties against lefties. So if you're going to stick one lefty, leave one lefty in the lineup, make it your good defensive player, which was Kepler. But the Phillies, I don't know. I feel like it kind of you're not playing into his strengths by doing that, especially at age 30. The notion of maybe he'll get better against he's not going to get better against lefties, but
they had Marsh playing in left field most of last year. It seemed he made the most consistent starts there, and he's also a left-handed hitter. I don't really know what their right-handed option is out there, to be honest. So.
And then the other signing, which we talked about, was Santana. So what I thought was interesting, and this goes back to the payroll discussion that we had, Ken Rosenthal had a good article about Santana, kind of behind the scenes of how he ended up back in Cleveland for a third stint. And Rosenthal listed 8 teams that pursued Santana.
Okay.
I forget what his wording was, but basically these were the teams that were going after him. Might even been these are the teams that made him some kind of offer, and it's telling that the Twins were not one of those 8 teams listed. Which not surprising, because again, once it became clear he was going to get a lot more than $5 million, it's not doable for the. It's like you're wasting each other's time at that point.
Despite how well he played last year, would the Twins have more confidence in him at this time this year than they had with him this time last year? And I think it's debatable. You can say, well, look what the year he put up, and plus he's better defensively than we thought he was. They might have already known kind of about the defensive part. They sure sounded like they knew about that defensive aspect of his game when we met with them very first day in spring training, and Rocco was already talking about Santana's being playing first base on a regular basis. I don't know that I have more confidence in him than I did last year. I'm not sure they should be paying much more than $5 or $6 million for Santana.
I agree. This goes back to, we had many of these discussions surrounding Nelson Cruz, who was a much better player at this age than Carlos Santana. But the thing we kept coming back to was, at some point, everyone ceases being great. And the fact that you're still great at 37 or 38 or 39, that's incredible. And I mean, all credit to you. Nelson Cruz worked his ass off physically. I saw some of it. And I know Carlos Santana, same way. It's not a coincidence that those are two of the rare guys who are playing close to their best at, nearing 40. But we saw it with Nelson Cruz. I mean, when it ends in a hurry. And that's just how aging works in baseball. And so, yeah, to your point, like, if the Twins
and in life, by the way.
God, am I learning that? Oh my God. Whew. From 39 to 42, I aged 300 years physically and probably like 800 years mentally. Like, oh my God. Anyway, yeah. So I could sympathize, I guess, with this topic. But to your point, even like, given what the Twins' actual payroll situation is, which they're over by 10 million, they'd have to trade just to be neutral from a payroll standpoint. It was probably a moot point. But if you said to me, their payroll's 150 expected to be instead of 130, so they have 10 million to spend right now. And then you said to me, do you want them to basically spend that 10 million or 12 million, as it turned out, on a 38-year-old Carlos Santana? I probably would say no, just because what are the odds that he's going to be as good at 38 as he was at 37? I mean, he wasn't even that good at 34, 35, 36. He was better at 37 than he had been in any point in the previous 3 years. I give credit to the Twins. Like you kind of said, would the Twins have more, I forget what you wording, but like more confidence in him being worth that at 38 than he was at 37? I give the Twins all kinds of credit for seeing a 37-year-old guy who, to me at least, appeared to be on the decline for several years, a formerly really great player, all-star caliber player, certainly, and a nemesis for them. But I didn't see anything in Santana. I mean, go back and listen to what we said when they signed him. I was like, I hope they only use him in a platoon role.
Right. He
was so much better defensively than I ever expected. But to your point, Baldelli was talking about him winning Gold Gloves first day of spring training. And so I don't think he shocked the Twins, and that's a credit to them. But that doesn't necessarily mean they would have expected the same type of season at 38.
Right. Well, I mean, and just to put a fine point on it, he's 38 right now. He turns 39 on April 8th. So really, they squeezed that out of him in what was his 38-year-old season, and now Cleveland's betting on him in his 39-year-old season. Now, that's not much different than what you said. You said 37 to 38 on it, but it kind of is actually. Sometime between like 37 and 41, things are not going to go well, and you get one of those years and it works out. You're playing with the house's money. That might be when you want to walk away from the table. Despite, so
I agree. I think one of the people will often hear us talk about like ages in baseball, and what we tend to use is not someone's age, like their literal age on a given day, but their seasonal age. And so you'd say like his age 38 season or his age 39 season, because the reason that we do that is if you're comparing like across eras and you want to go, well, how many guys were above average hitters at Carlos Santana's age? Well, you can't look up like his literal age, 38 years, 157 days. Like that doesn't really help you. What you want to do is, how many guys in their age 39 season were above average hitters, and you would group him in with that. And the way that works is, I believe it's July 1st.
I think that's
whatever age you are on July 1st that's your age for the season. And so, yeah, I mean, you're right. If you look at like the entire history of baseball, hitters in their age 37 season, you probably lose, how many were above average, whatever the number is. Let's say there were 50 of them who were above average. You probably lose at least a third and maybe a half of them going from age 37 to 38. And then the same thing is probably true, or maybe even more so, going from 38 to 39. The hill you're trying to climb is steeper and steeper every time. So I don't have any problem with not giving Santana 12 million or more. It sounds like it would have taken more to convince him of that. And we should also note, to clear room for him, both at first base, but from a payroll standpoint, the Guardians traded Josh Naylor, who has been, their cleanup hitter, left-handed slugger, first baseman, DH for the past 3 or 4 years. In my head, he's just destroyed the Twins, although I looked up the actual numbers, and he's been sort of mediocre against the Twins. But in my head, it's possible I'm just remembering a couple of homers off Emilio Pagan or whatever. But in my head, Josh Naylor has just been an absolute terror on the Twins. But they ended up trading him to the Diamondbacks because he was expected to make around $12 million in arbitration. So they basically traded him, replaced him with Santana for the exact same money, picked up a pitching prospect and a supplemental draft pick in the process, which isn't bad, although I probably, going back to the age discussion, I probably would bet on Josh Naylor out hitting Carlos Santana in 2025, although defensively, Naylor's pretty bad defensively. Goldschmidt basically got the same. I think he got $12.5 million from the Yankees. Josh Bell, who we mentioned earlier, got $6 million, I believe, from the Washington Nationals. The first base market is basically gone. I mean, it's free agent wise. I mean, it's Justin Turner. Maybe if after him, you're getting into like the Donovan Solanos and the Mark Canhas and those type of guys who to me are more like role player, $2 million type of guys.
And it's not just first baseman; it's basically bats, right? I mean, there's just I mean, you can take a look at corner outfielders or a lot of areas and say, well, the Twins could move some stuff around here. They've got openings maybe in DH, maybe at first base, maybe in the corner outfield. Like they can shift some chairs around and see, make room for wherever. It doesn't really matter what the position is. There's just not a lot left on the free agent market unless you're, going crazy. So,
I mean, this has been one of the faster moving overall free agent classes, I guess, in the last 5 years at least.
Yeah.
I think relief pitching hasn't really had a run yet. There's a lot of pretty good relievers left, but starting, I mean, I think out of the Athletic ranked, I was part of the ranking. They ranked the top 40 free agents. I think like 24 of them have signed already, including I think 10 of the top 15. Like you said, most of the corner outfield, first base bats have either already signed or they're Pete Alonso, and it's irrelevant to the Twins situation, obviously. So,
which explains the next two moves we're about to talk about. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about a couple of our sponsors. Hims, we talked earlier about removing barriers. If you are interested in regrowing hair, that's also something that significant barriers seem to kind of withhold you to go see a doctor, all this other stuff. I would suggest that maybe you start by taking a look at Hims, hims.com/Gleeman. Go check it out there. What you're going to do is you're going to get a free online visit, and then it can help you choose your personal, chewable or orable or spray or serum treatment to find out what works best for you. It makes it simple, and process is 100% online, so there's no uncomfortable doctor visits to talk about stuff. All you have to do is just answer a few questions, and a medical provider will determine if the treatment's right for you. And if they prescribe it, your treatment is sent directly to you for free. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. Hims has hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, and they can help you get your confidence back, too, with visibly thicker and fuller hair, Aaron Gleeman, something you and I both probably need.
How dare you, John? Start your free online visit today at hims.com/Gleeman. That's HIMS, hims.com/Gleeman for your personalized hair loss treatment options. Hims.com/Gleeman. Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Prescription products required online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for full details and important safety information. hims.com/Gleeman. Our final sponsor is Raycon. And I was just using a Raycon about an hour ago.
That's awesome. Yeah. If you're doing a New Year's resolution or something, sometimes that New Year's resolution helps to have a little something playing in your ears. You know what I mean? Whether it's you're going for runs more regularly, or you're meditating more regularly, you're going for walks, whatever it is, you want to set yourself up to succeed. And I would suggest one way to set yourself up to succeed is make an environment that helps with that. And one thing that can really help with that is wireless earbuds. It's so much different having wireless earbuds than it is having to carry around headphones and such. With the wire that's attached to things, it makes it a lot easier. We use them when we run. You can use them for, if you're taking classes online, that's something that they're good for. You can set them up to use with your phone, and Raycon just is easy to set up. They're well engineered earbuds, wireless earbuds, and they work perfectly. They have the 32-hour battery life. They have noise cancellation. They're half the price of the other premium, and that's even before you get to the discount that we're going to talk about here. And they're also available in a variety of vibrant colors and such for you as well. So they're the perfect,
you can get
perfect buddy for your New Year's resolutions.
You can get 15% off site-wide, any of the products, if you go to buyraycon.com/Gleeman. That's 15% off at buyraycon, BUYRAYCON, or CON, BUYRAYCON, buyraycon.com/Gleeman. That's buyraycon.com/Gleeman.
You can't lose with them. They've got a return policy as well. Just 30-day happiness guarantee, no questions asked. Go to buyraycon.com/Gleeman.
So, as we just talked about, not to give a short shrift to Caleb Thielbar, but we'll talk about him at the end maybe. But the Twins lost a left-handed hitting right fielder in Max Kepler and a switch hitting first baseman in Carlos Santana. They have left-handed hitting right field options, obviously. I mean, they have Matt Wallner, I would expect to be the opening day right fielder. They have Trevor Larnach, who I'd expect to be the opening day left fielder. They could swap that. I don't know. We'll see. Emmanuel Rodriguez, who's their second best prospect and probably one of the dozen or so best hitting prospects in all of the minors, ended the season at AAA and is himself a left-handed hitting, I wouldn't say corner outfielder. He's a center fielder right now, but probably long-term a good right fielder defensively, maybe a center fielder. So, I mean, they have Kepler replacements, which played a part in why I said earlier that I never expected them. It became clear that they weren't going to make an effort to re-sign Kepler. Santana leaves a more legitimate hole in the lineup at first base. And, I think in ideal circumstance, even if you thought that $12 million for him was too big of a bet to make on a 38, 39-year-old, there were guys like Goldschmidt, there were guys like Josh Bell, there's still a guy like Justin Turner. There are some other, there's some trade options. Certainly we could go through some of those names if we wanted to. I wonder more and more, and again, this is the result of nothing happening. So then I start to try to read between lines and connect dots that may or not be there. But the fact that the few low wattage moves they have made have been for basically AAA first basemen makes me think maybe they're setting up a situation. Whether they would have loved Santana back, whether they would have loved Goldschmidt or Bell or whoever, because of the limitations with payroll, they're setting up perhaps a situation where it's Miranda, I would say, is by default at the top of the first base depth chart right now. Maybe Julian is in the mix there too. You add Mickey Gasper and Mike Ford, who we'll talk about here in 1 second. That gives you kind of four guys to cycle through there. There's, maybe the possibility of some other minor league guys stepping in there, but I wonder if it's a situation where because they basically have no spending room, they just say, look, this can be Miranda,
right?
But we don't want to we don't want to just hand him that job for a number of reasons. I think defensively he needs to show he can do more consistently, be at least solid over there. He's never going to be Santana. I think he has to show that he's healthy, that he can, how can they count on him making it through a full season productive? He's yet to do that in 3 tries in the majors.
Yeah. Same
thing to some extent with Julian too. I mean, honestly, those two at first base are a real natural platoon. It's a lefty and a righty. Whoever's not starting on a given day can be a bench bat for you, and they both would have value in that role. Julian can also play some second base or DH. Miranda can also play some third base and DH. So that's not the end of the world to have that as your first base answer. It's cheap. They're young.
Right.
They have upside.
There are Twins
have
teams. There are Twins teams within the last decade where we would have taken a look at that as our opening day first base platoon and gone, all right, I'm kind of excited about this. Like we've got,
right.
Potentially productive sides, productivity from both sides of the plate. Both players have a fair amount of upside. We've seen, in stints from both of them what they can do. And let's roll. Like I could be excited about that. It's just that those teams were also not necessarily competitive, and looking to compete for an AL Central division crown either. So
Yeah, and I think because of how poorly the season ended for the
Right.
Twins, but
Yep.
for Julian and for Miranda,
right,
and Miranda's health history and all that stuff, and also the fact that I would expect both of them to be pretty rough defensively. They've been working on it all offseason, I'm sure, and they're going to work on it in spring training. But I'm not trying to compare them to the reigning Gold Glove winner. Anybody's going to look bad compared to how great Santana was at first base for the Twins last year. He was, I said, the second best and maybe the best Twins first baseman in the 20 years I've been covering them, behind Doug Mankiewicz, and he was phenomenal. But I think there's a real chance that they're like both are well below average defensively, which puts a lot more pressure on their bat. And it's also a spot where if you're not at least average-ish production offensively, and you're not getting a good glove defensively, that's a spot where, because the rest of the league is so productive year in and year out at first base, and DH too, it's similar story, because that's where all the big bats go. That's where the guys who can hit go. You can really fall behind pretty quickly, relative to the rest of the league. And so that would be my worry. I'm assuming that's probably their worry too. But yeah, I mean, they might get forced into basically throwing Miranda at first base and seeing if it sticks because of the payroll situation. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing or a bad idea or a bad process to get there. Like I do think first base, if he's going to be a long-term piece for the Twins, more than the next year or two, it's much more likely to be at first base or DH than it is at third base. I mean, he did an okay job at third base last year, coming back from injury, but he's not going to be a long-term third baseman. So if you believe in Miranda's bat, sticking him at first base or DH is not the end of the world. The real thing, though, is, well, what if he's hurt again? What if he doesn't have great power really for a first baseman? And then there are all kinds of those questions and much more even with Eddie Julian. So you want to have some alternatives, which I think they're setting up here. But I just wonder if those alternatives are going to be more competition for those guys as opposed to, like, are they going to right now it's Miranda's job to lose, I guess is how I would put it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Have we seen or heard any indication that they are even seriously planning on moving Julian? We're talking Julian like he's already, kind of a first baseman, but we haven't really seen them do that with Julian at all. And don't believe we've heard them even really talk about having him at first base. And so, and both of the players that we're going to be talking about here, one is left-handed, one is a switch hitter that mostly it looks like he's been hidden versus he's hit a lot better as a left-handed hitter. I'm not really sure. Is Julian really? Do we really know if Julian is being considered? Like, are we going to show up at spring training there and be like, no, Julian's not playing first base. He's going to be concentrating on second base.
Right. I mean, I think at the end of last season, they were working him out at first base a lot. And that's just like pregame stuff. And that I do think there was I didn't go to the winter meeting, so I can't say for sure, but I think there was a quote from Baldelli basically talking about those two guys and how they'll need to improve defensively if they're part of the first base mix.
Okay.
And I mean, this is one of those things where you can sort of figure out that something is true based on what won't be true.
Right. No,
listen,
it makes sense. Yeah, for sure. I got it. Right.
I don't think they're going to hand him the second base job. So,
right.
I mean, that could change. Who knows? We'll see what happens in spring training. Let's talk about the two guys that you just mentioned. Mickey Gasper, who they acquired. Well, so first of all, going back 3 weeks was the Rule 5 draft, and we were kind of more coy than I like to be, but it was kind of an odd situation because I didn't really want to hurt the Twins or anything before the Rule 5 draft. But we had heard, I talked to multiple people from multiple teams that were kind of poking around or sniffing around Jovani Morán, who's coming back from Tommy John surgery, as a potential Rule 5 pick because the Twins dropped him from the 40-man roster. So, prior to Tommy John, he certainly looked like an MLB caliber middle reliever with some upside, great changeup, bad control, that sort of thing. So not surprising that some teams were like, hey, what's Jovani Morán's status? He did not get picked in the Rule 5 draft. And once he went unpicked, there was nothing like pushing them to trade him because if you're not on the 40-man roster, which he wasn't, they dropped him 2 years ago when he got hurt. He's just on a standard minor league, 2-year minor league contract because he had the surgery, but just like a regular minor league contract, which means they can send him to AAA. They can keep him in the minors for the entire season and just rehab him. If at any point he looked healthy and promising again, they could just re-add him to the 40-man roster and call him up, at which point they had him under team control, I think, through 2029, because he only has like a year plus of Major League service time. So there wasn't like if we're not going to have him in the majors, we might as well just trade him rather than lose him. They weren't going to lose him. He was just in the organization as a standard minor league player. And yet, despite the fact that some teams were sniffing around him and then he went unpicked, 2 weeks after the Rule 5 draft, they trade him to one of the teams that was sniffing around him, the Boston Red Sox, for Mickey Gasper, who 29-year-old switch hitter, kind of split time between first base and catcher in the minors. Amusingly, had a great, he's been a very good minor league hitter. He was a 27th round draft pick of the Yankees, I want to say, 7 years ago or whatever it was. At no point has he been considered a prospect, but he was so consistently good, especially in terms of on-base percentage, drawn walks, hitting for average in the minors, that at the end of last season, after he crushed AAA for about 2-3 months, the Red Sox called him up, and he actually debuted, I think, at second base. Now, the Red Sox were struggling at that point and banged up at that point, so that doesn't necessarily tell you everything. But I remember at the time, I think he's a local guy. He's definitely an East Coast guy. I remember he was sort of positioned as a, not quite Dobnik-esque, but maybe like Caleb Thielbar-esque. Like, oh, look this is a great story. Like, this guy is 29. He's been, grinding away as a 27th round draft pick, which they don't even have 27 rounds anymore. He's been putting up big numbers at AA and AAA for years now. What a nice thing for him to, get 2 weeks in the majors at age 29. But the Red Sox did not drop him from the 40-man roster after that, and then they actually needed a roster spot for Walker Buehler. Yeah. So instead of DFAing him, they trade him to the Twins for Morán. It's an interesting trade. I was a little surprised, just, after sticking with him through the rehab for a year, that they would just give up on Morán, because there was nothing, motivating them to do it.
Right.
Especially because, as we just talked about a minute ago, like, it's not like they have left-handed options really for the bullpen. So
I'd also heard from some people there like, oh, well, we do have Jovani Morán, like in terms of left-handed options, like what I basically heard was like, don't forget about Jovani Morán. And then
you can forget about him now. I agree. It certainly suggests, just logically, that they weren't particularly optimistic about his ability to get back to full strength. And it's not like he was a guaranteed, contributor even at full strength. He struggled so much to throw strikes, but I thought, you've gotten over the hump with him where he missed the whole year. This was the year where you try to get him back on a mound and maybe a second half contributor or something like that. So I was a little surprised. I don't really get the logic of that. It's also interesting, like, Gasper is a guy that is, 29-year-old AAA guy. I'm not saying he's not a decent player overall. He's been a really good hitter at AAA. Certainly last year he was a great hitter at AAA. He led all of AAA in OPS last year, both AAA leagues. And I would sight unseen take a look at any guy who leads AAA in OPS, whether
Sure.
he's 19 or 50.
Sure.
I feel like I've been pretty consistent with that over 20 years of doing this. Like anybody who stands out, if they're 3 feet tall, if they weigh 800 pounds, if they're 112 years old, if the guy was the best at AAA, I'm willing to look at him, you know?
Right.
And so I get it from that standpoint. But, you know, I asked around about Mickey Gasper because my initial reaction was that maybe he would be part of the catcher solution if they were to trade Vasquez. Like maybe he could be the backup catcher because I didn't know much about Mickey Gasper, obviously. So I looked at his, you know, just track record at AAA, AA, and he's basically been half catcher, half first base. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe he's a good hitting, poor fielding catcher. If they trade Vasquez, he could be, you know, platoon mate or backup to Jeffers cheaply or something like that. But asking around about him, not a good defensive catcher. Probably not a viable, you know, defensive catcher. It's subjective, I guess, a little. If you hit well enough, you're a viable anything. But, and so now I kind of think he was probably more of a first base consideration, like we're getting into now, where it's like, all right, you got Miranda, you got Julian, you'd like to have a veteran or two. Now, I would prefer that veteran be like a Josh Bell or a Justin Turner, or at least a Donovan Solano or a Mark Canha, but those guys cost money, and apparently they don't have any money. So you get Mickey Gasper, who's been an on-base machine in the minors and is a switch hitter, and you know he can play first base. He's played a little second base, a little third base. And then a couple days ago, I guess it was yesterday. We're recording this Friday. I don't want to confuse you since you're in another.
It has been confusing. I'm not gonna lie.
You're on another planet, basically. But Mike Ford is kind of a similar player. I mean, he spent parts of 6 years in the majors. He's played 250 games in the majors. Left-handed hitter. Actually, 2 years ago had a nice run with the Mariners in the majors. But other than that, only has a 93 OPS plus in the majors, but a good hitter at AAA. Just a very good, you know, draws walks, hits for power, low average type of guy at AAA. Okay at first base, left-handed bat. To me, him and Gasper are pretty similar. Gasper maybe has the edge in that he can play, if needed, catcher, second base, like in an emergency situation. But I think they're both really just first base DH. One's a switch hitter, one's a left-handed hitter. They're good AAA players. They'd probably love to have them at St. Paul as sort of backup plans.
Right.
St. Paul would love to have them because they're really good AAA players.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder, like, is this not to steal an NFL term, but is this the first base room? Is this how they always say, like, this is the wide receiver room or the quarterback? Right. Like, is this what's going to go day one of spring training? Are we going to be talking about, you know, this being Miranda's job to go win? Basically?
I will be interested to see how things shake out at spring training with this group. One thing I want to call out about Ford, because I've already seen it, you know, referenced. He's got reverse splits over his career, in that he's hit left-handers with a higher OPS than he has hit right-handers.
In the majors, you're talking about.
In the majors, right. You also I will just call this out, whenever you see reverse splits, especially on a batter, especially on a left-handed batter, make sure that you take a look at how many plate appearances they have versus each side. I don't know. I don't remember exactly the breakdown, but something like 5-1 of his plate appearances are versus right-handers versus left-handers. And so the fact that he has a high OPS versus left-handers, I think it might only be like 120 plate appearances or something like that. Or I don't know. That might be too low, but as I recall, it was something like 5-1. And when you see that, what that means is that's an indication that they are hiding him versus left-handed pitchers who are any good whatsoever.
Right.
And that is an indication that don't pay attention to the splits as to whether or not you think he's going to be able to hit left-handers.
I mean, I'll take that a step further, which it's interesting. And I think what you're pointing out is definitely true. I mean, he's been used he's a marginal major leaguer. So when he's gotten opportunities, it's been like, oh, can we get 2 decent months out of this guy as our option against righties or something like that? He's I would say probably never been handed a job for a month or a season or anything. And I'll take that a step further. You are pretty safe if you just always assume that a left-handed hitter has normal splits. the outliers there over the last 20 years are basically Ichiro. That's it. Who's one of the more uncommon, unique, whatever you want to call it, players in the history of baseball. Other than that, if you give a left-handed hitter 5,000 plate appearances, his splits will be just like all the other left-handed hitters, basically. But yeah, it's interesting because it show. I mean, certainly if Mike Ford were to win a job with the Twins, it would be a pure platoon left-handed bat. He faces all the right-handed pitchers, either playing first base or DH, presumably kind of platooning with Miranda, let's say, something like that. I mean, Gasper probably the same thing because as you talked about earlier, he's a switch hitter, and I'd certainly rather have Gasper at the plate against a lefty than Ford, but he's been much better as a left-handed hitter,
right?
Which kind of makes sense because that sucks for Eddie Julian.
Yeah, I know, because it's clear who they have a little bit more confidence in, right?
But if we should say correct. I was taught by early on while driving, you never say right. You never go right. You know, correct. Anyway, but if you're skeptical of Miranda, the easiest thing to do with him is sort of work him in as a platoon player, gradually give him more playing time if he deserves it. So you'd want to pair him with a left-handed hitter. Although I will say Miranda has weird splits too in his career, although that's small-ish sample size too. So yeah, that's Gasper and Ford. I mean, I would like to 2 weeks from now, we maybe are laughing that we spent so much time that I wrote about these guys, that we talked about these guys, and then all they ended up doing was they went and traded for so-and-so, or they went and signed Justin Turner or something. But barring that, I do think that this is sort of a Twins setting the floor, not putting themselves in a position where they have to rely on Miranda.
I mean, this is a pretty low floor.
I agree. Although I will say, like, from a projection standpoint, I saw that Zips, which is Dan Zimborski's Fangraphs projection, has Gasper at a 105 OPS plus.
Okay.
And I believe Ford, like I said, Ford has a 93 OPS plus in the majors. I think his projection was like a 96. So, slightly below average. Gasper slightly above average, which, by the way, is why Gasper would look appealing if he could catch it all. So we'll see if that even is a factor for the Twins. But, you use those guys only against lefty or against righties. You shield them completely against lefties. Maybe you can talk yourself into getting a 100 or a 105, 110 OPS plus, which is not that. I mean, Santana only had a 109 or something like that.
Something like season. That, yeah, right.
So, minimum salary, no commitment. That's not the end of the world, even especially if it's like a placeholder. If it's like we just need this to make sure Miranda's okay, or to give Julian a chance to get back on track.
What you're asking of these guys is hit righties.
Yes.
Hit them hard. And both of them are capable of that. So they've both shown that much that they can be capable of. And then really the eggs are in the Miranda basket. Like that's ultimately the mystery of him is being, how can he be so good and then, fall off a cliff the way he has, 3 of the last 3 years, where suddenly, when everything's fine tuned, he is just absolutely unstoppable. He looks like he's playing, as somebody who's in Australia, it looks like he's playing cricket out there. Like they cannot get him out. Right. And then suddenly it's like, no, he's just lost now. He's just lost, and we've lost him for a month, so I think ultimately that's going to be the solution. And when they can, and they want to get him some time off, and they need to give him a break, let's get somebody in there who can hit righties really, really well. So
yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. Do you think you're going to start a cricket podcast? Maybe?
I did go to a Melbourne Aces game.
Yeah,
I went to the Melbourne Aces game. I would describe the vibe there as sort of a low A vibe, or maybe medium college program vibe.
But that's the baseball team, right?
That's the baseball team. Yes. Yeah.
No,
I did not
go
to. I had a chance. The biggest cricket day of the year is the day after Christmas, Boxing Day here in Australia, where they have a 5-day match between Australia and one of the other major countries that has been into cricket. And this year it was India, which is the biggest, essentially, as biggest, maybe the biggest match they will have in, over the next few years. That one was sold out to a crazy amount because not only do all the Australians want to go, all the Indians who are living in Australia also want to go to it. Over the 5-day match, Australia won that. It was very exciting. A big story was that their opener, Australia's opener, was a 19-year-old who'd never played in a test match before. Everybody was very nervous about it, but very excited because he's supposed to be very talented, and he ended up having an incredible opener. By the way, is the leadoff batter in cricket. He ended up having an incredible run his first time. They were hoping to get like 19 runs out of him, maybe, and he ended up with 60 plus. So everybody was very excited, and that helped to carry Australia to a victory.
Can he play first base?
He play first base. I did not check to see which way he batted, whether or not he was left-handed. I did not check his splits. I come to Australia now. This is like the third time in 25 years. So about every 12 years, I come to Australia, and every time I have to relearn how cricket is played, and I think I have done as poor a job of remembering it this time as I ever have done of it. But we do like watch the highlights and stuff and try to figure things out. It's fun, actually. It's a fun game to play. To watch.
There was a cricket documentary on Netflix like 5 years ago. I think it was like the main league in India is. It was like a documentary, like a season.
It's the India Premier League is what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I watched it, and it was a great, like I was fascinated by the documentary, and I watched like 10 hours of it probably. If you would have said to me, for $10,000 at the end of watching that, describe to me the basic rules of cricket, I'd have been like, sorry, can't do it. So I'm just wired for baseball.
I would say we've got about 2/3 of them down, and we translate them all into baseballese. Like a wicket is an out.
That's the thing, because there's so many similarities to baseball,
right?
Like just stylistically, obviously, but also just like the fact that there's like innings kind of and that sort of thing. But it's just different enough that almost screws you up.
Well,
because I keep trying to think of it in baseball terms, and it's just not quite like that.
That is exactly correct. Because if you make an error in baseball, it's bad. But if you make an error in cricket, oh my God, is it bad? Like, because these guys score, a guy will score 100 runs in his at bat, in his one at bat.
Right.
So one plate appearance, I should say. Right.
Yeah. So making an out is like massive. It's
it's a huge thing. Right. So if you if you are a outfielder that we watched 2 outfielders come together and then let the ball fall, but they hubby wifed it. Right. And the guy ended up scoring 75 more runs after that.
That's rough for the old. But hey, it doesn't count it on your ERA.
And the pitcher / bowler is just like, he's just rubbing his temples the whole time. So,
can you imagine that? It's like, oh, Julian really mishandled that. Oh, Joe Ryan gave up 70 runs after that. Speaking of, to finish on here. So yeah, cricket. I don't know. We could do a cricket podcast.
But Melbourne Aces was fun, and I do have to mention Delman Young. Featured in there a big picture of Delman Young hugging somebody because they won the championship Delman Young's year, one of Delman Young's couple of years here for the playing for the Melbourne Aces, hugging somebody in the championship celebration. Very clearly Delman Young there. So, and that's also where last year it was where Thorpe pitched.
Yeah. The Twins have under the previous regime when you and I started 20 years ago doing this thing.
Right.
The Twins were kind of at the forefront of Australian scouting, and they signed Grant Balfour, and there was a guy, Brad Thomas, and Luke Hughes, and Glenn Williams, and I'm thinking of some other ones. I'm missing some too. And some of them made the majors, and some of them, Balfour ended up being a good reliever once he left the Twins. Lewis Thorpe was the more recent one, and he kind of washed out for on and off field reasons, I think. But yeah, it never really paid off for the Twins, I would say. No. I mean, we just talked an hour ago about how they signed a 16-year-old kid from Germany for $800,000 and got 15 years out of him in Max Kepler. They signed, a couple dozen guys probably over the course of a decade or so from Australia and really got Liam Hendricks is a great example.
Well, that's a good,
they ended up being good players, just not for the Twins.
Yeah,
Which,
the Melbourne Aces team, and it feels like some teams are still kind of invested in the Australian. Like for instance, the Melbourne Aces team had 4 or 5 people that are in the Phillies organization someplace, or are recently in the Phillies organization someplace. There were a fair number of Phillies uniforms in the crowd, and that's what made us look it up. And then we looked it up, and found out that the biggest organization for signing Phillies was Adelaide, and that was because Adelaide, or seemingly because Adelaide's coach is also a coach in the like low A Phillies organization, something like that. And it did make me wonder, like, I want to talk to somebody in the Twins organization about this at spring training. Like, have they ever explored or how it works in having, a lot of Hispanic players like to play in like some of the winter leagues in like the Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico or something like that for those championship things. Uh, you know, American/English speaking folks, do they ever think about trying to send them here for winter ball, or have they ever toyed with the idea of getting, several organizations together? There's like 8 teams in the Australian Baseball League here that, some of those AA, AAA guys who are, I mean, I would suggest, a Keishel or a Gasper might want to come over here and, get ready for the season by keeping their skills sharp in December and January. It's a fairly short season. It's like a 40-game season here.
Yeah, not everyone is like you and wants to take a 15-hour flight each way every other week.
But it's a lovely country. It's a lot of
sure.
You'd be in worse hells than spending the summer in Melbourne. It's gorgeous.
Oh, I would go. I just wouldn't leave.
Yeah.
Like, I'm only going once. I got one flight in me.
Fair.
The amount of drugs that I would need to take to make it through that flight, I can't then turn around within weeks and take another flight because my body would just, I think, shut down.
I'm literally tracking both of my kids making their way back to their respective countries right now on, 2 to 3 flights that in total, 24 plus hours for sure.
Oh,
so
that sounds, I mean, when I take like a 4-hour flight,
right,
by like hour 3, I'm like, get me out of this plane. I got to get out of this plane. Yeah. Like, so I can't even imagine. I would have to be.
It is far away.
I would have to be unconscious for better or worse. Like, somebody would have to either hit me with a mallet. We'd have to get some real drugs flowing or, something. Last but least, before we shut up and I go have my birthday dinner. Well, we got 2 things, but we didn't really talk too much about the whole Royce Lewis at second base thing. We talked a little bit about it with Dan like a month ago,
right,
or right after the winter meetings. But as we kind of try to figure out what the first base situation is, and if Miranda is going to be needed mostly at first base, then him being an option at third base isn't quite as relevant or, that's helpful, I guess. And part of the reason you would want to move Royce Lewis to second base is so that Miranda would be an option at third base because he's not an option at second base, obviously.
Yeah, good point.
Maybe this is certainly reading too much of it in January, but a lot of it just depends on, are they just going to hand a job to Brooks Lee?
Right.
Or are they going to make Brooks Lee go back to AAA, or at the very least have a monster spring training to kind of win the job? Because, Brooks Lee, I thought looked very good defensively in his first taste of the majors, but didn't do much offensively aside from like a first handful of games where he was very good. And then he just kind of got quiet, but he was also hurt during that time, we found out. So I don't know, it's an interesting side plot. And I just think in general, and we talked about this with Dan a little bit on the Patreon from the winter meetings. So that was like a month ago, but there was so much made of every word that both came out of Royce Lewis's mouth down the stretch, and also every word that was spoken by others about him down the stretch. Most of it, in a negative. I'm not saying people were ripping him, but fans were like, "Oh man, are we starting to see, some of the holes or the negative aspects of a otherwise, person we had fallen in love with on and off the field? He struggled on the field. He had injury problems. He said he got tired. There were some people questioning sort of his commitment to some things or ability to make adjustments and all that. And then, of course, they tried to have him kind of learn second base on the fly. And he was very open about it, which I give him credit for. And he basically said, I hate doing this on the fly. I hate going out there. We just talked about making an error in cricket. Like he was so petrified by the idea of like costing them the chance at a playoff spot by like letting a ball go through his legs at second base. But now he's been working on it during the offseason, and Baldelli talked about it with Dan at the winter meetings. And then Dan went and hung out with Royce Lewis in Texas, and the quotes from that made it very clear, like, I think if we're up to Royce Lewis, he would probably play third base. I mean, if it were up to Royce Lewis, he'd still be playing shortstop. But
yes.
But the takeaway that I had was Royce Lewis not only doesn't have a problem playing second base, but if they tell him he's going to play second base, he's going to work his ass off to get good at second base. The issue really with him was the timing of it. I don't want to make an ass of myself or hurt the team in a situation where it's August and September and every inning matters. And I think the overall frustration he had of the first kind of on-field struggles of his entire career probably amplified that too. But I don't know. My takeaway from it is that it's a positive thing that his stance on it seems much more, team-oriented and reasonable, which is what I would have expected from him, which is why his comments to the contrary in September kind of were off-putting or, caused people to raise an eyebrow or whatever. But
well, I mean, and when we saw those comments back then, I think we did try to give the context of, I don't think this is somebody being a prima donna. I think this is somebody who's questioning why this wasn't something that happened earlier, that he just expressing a level of vulnerability about, I don't want to hurt the team here. Like, I'm not crazy about this. I'm not excited about it. I'm afraid I'm going to screw up. And that is closer to the personality you see from Royce Lewis, especially when it comes to interviews with media or with anybody, normal people, than it is the, prima donna thing that can be sort of projected onto a player of his caliber.
I'm a normal person, John.
Well,
no, actually,
not true
even
at all.
really.
Not even close.
No. It's my birthday, you bastard. You could at least say I'm a normal person. That's my present. That's what I want from you this year. Say I'm a normal person.
Normal person? We'll get there.
Okay, maybe in 2025.
It's going to be a belated gift.
I will also say, though, great. I'm waiting for your gift. I mean, you got till midnight, I guess, to the gift to get here. But
I'm already late here.
Sure. Yeah, I'm already 50 where you are. The other thing I will say about the Twins is that they didn't expect to have the need at second base because they were counting on Julian. They were counting on Brooks Lee, then got hurt at that point, which is kind of what pushed the last button to kind of, maybe we can use Lewis at second base. Like they were counting on guys being available at second base, Farmer for that matter, that were either bad or not available. So in terms of like planning on Lewis playing second base, I will also say in the past, it's been more his agent as opposed to Lewis himself, but they're, at some level one and the same. Was not the most, into him switching positions.
Right.
Commented about him playing center field when he got hurt, third base, same thing. But now, after 2 torn ACLs, and it's very obvious, at least to me, that he couldn't play shortstop now at this point physically. When Boris was asked about it, I think also at the winter meetings 3-4 weeks ago, he not only said some version of, hey, that's the Twins' decision to make, which is very different than his reaction to that sort of thing previously. He compared Lewis to Ryan Sandberg, one of the Hall of Fame great second basemen of all time. And so once you start doing that I think is in lockstep with Lewis's, view of it, which is like you said, what I would expect from Lewis, which is I'll do whatever you want me to do. I just don't want to be unprepared for it. So it might be a lot of talk for nothing because it's still not 100% clear to me the way in which they'd like to arrange the infield, but I do think they feel like Lee is going to be better than Lewis at both positions, second base and third base. But Lewis might be better at second relative to third because there's not as many long throws.
Right.
So I don't know. It could be a spring training thing. It might be a situation where everybody moves around. I mean, we've seen that in the past with the Twins. So, and then the very last thing I wanted to touch on, we're not going to give the same Kepler Santana treatment to Caleb Thielbar, but I just wanted to retell because we never got him on the damn podcast.
I know. I mean,
it's not. I guess we could still try to get him. It's a little
I
weird
would love
now,
to.
but
I would love to.
I told a version of
And
this,
now he's
but
gonna,
it
now
might
he's, and now he's going to be in Phoenix over spring training. We
right.
we can't even get him in spring training
for the Cubs Twins World Series in October. We'll have him on. But I think I told this on the Patreon finally when he was a free agent, but I'll retell it quickly here. So when they won the Toronto series, in 2020, October 2023, first series win in 20 years, all that. And Thielbar had gotten, I think it was either in the 6th or the 7th inning, a huge double play to get them out of a jam when they were leading 2-0, I think in game 2, the clinching game. And so they're going nuts in the clubhouse afterward. They've won their first series in 20 years. They're headed to Houston. And I'm got my poncho on and I'm trying to, interview some people and stuff. I got beer all over me and everything. And he strolls up to me with a beer in one hand and a lit cigar in the other. And he like sidles up next to me and he goes, "Well, you got to have me on the fucking podcast now." I swore, sorry. On the effing podcast now. I forgot this wasn't the Patreon. Well, you leave it in. It's an hour and plus in. And he told me, I think he told me, well, so I said to him, just to be clear, do you think that's what's been keeping us from wanting you on the podcast? Like that you guys haven't won enough? Like I was waiting for you to win a playoff series. And he was like, "Oh, I don't know." And I think he said he's got a couple of cousins who are listeners, which shout out to any Thielbar relatives who are listeners. So anyway,
I know one of his cousins. So
really?
Yeah.
Okay. Then the next spring, so we didn't have him on that offseason. I don't know why necessarily. We tried to get him on the Meltdown last year as one of our guests.
Right.
But his flight was basically, as the Meltdown was starting, he was flying out of town. I think he lived in one of the Dakotas where his wife is a basketball coach. So we couldn't get him on there. So then last spring, you might have been there. I don't remember. You must have been there. Because he came up to me and he said, "Hey, sorry." It was like in the dugout, before the games had even started. And he was like, "Hey, sorry about the whole Meltdown thing. Like, I didn't realize, what the timing of it was and blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Oh, no problem. Like, you want to come on the podcast finally now?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, definitely." And I said, "Tomorrow?" And he said, "Let me work out today. Come find me afterward and we'll figure out either tomorrow or the next day." So he went to go work out. This was like in, mid-February this past spring. And then I never saw him.
Right.
For like a week.
Yeah, this is the way it can be in the locker room. Like you get a player for a second, then they get on their schedules, and then.
But here's the thing: he's generally not that hard to find, and he's
not.
Pretty friendly and chatty and all that. Well, it turns out he injured his hamstring.
That's right.
He either was already injured and like tested it that day after I told him to come on the podcast, or he literally injured it that day. I'm not 100% sure. So he wasn't on the field again for basically the rest of spring training. He was like rehabbing the whole time. Yeah. And so I essentially never ran into him again. And even if I had, I don't know that he would have wanted to do an interview, like a fun interview while banged up. And, he struggled then with that injury and just overall early in the season to the point that we were like, "Oh boy, I don't know. Like, is this the end of the line? It's a hell of a story. He's 38 or whatever." But he was pretty functionally solid in the second half. Like certainly enough to be a, number 2 lefty in a decent bullpen, maybe. Certainly not a number 1. And so, yeah, good for him signing with the Cubs. Bad for us that he never came on the podcast because I think he would be a very fun guest. I mean, it's a hell of a story, but also we have a weird connection to him with this podcast. Not to him, but just through him. The story we've told at the very beginnings. We had a drunk lady come up and talk to us about him when he was an independent league pitcher who hadn't even signed with the Twins. Yeah. So that'll be fun. So I don't know, maybe once he hangs it up, hopefully he plays another 5 years or whatever. But once he hangs it up, maybe he'll be a meltdown guest at that point. But
He will be in his 38th year, or not 30.
Yeah.
I mean, his year
Age
38,
38
age 38 season here. He was better last year than his numbers suggested. I think. I think he was. I think he was. I've got a because we didn't see his velocity dip. His just control just kind of lost him a little bit, and
Right.
because he started out the season hurt, I'm pretty optimistic that he ends up having a resurgence in Wrigleyville, and that is a great place to have a resurgence. So yeah, I'm excited to see how he does this year, and sad to see him go. It'll be interesting to see how he does. And one way or the other, we're going to have him on this podcast, I think.
Yes, whether he likes it or not.
Great. Right.
He's not only one of the better stories to get signed out of independent ball 2 regimes ago, have a solid 3-year run with the Gardy managed team, then get cut, get stuck at AAA to the point that he was basically retired. He had started kind of gone into coaching at that point. And then this regime of the Twins called him up and said, you want to give it one last go here? We actually think we can add some velocity. We think you can tweak this. And then he has a second run with the Twins that is even better than the first run, to the point that, he's striking out 10 guys per 9 innings. He's, for 3 or 4 years, he was a very, very good, 7th inning, 8th inning type of lefty. And he earned a whole bunch more money than anybody ever expected. And also, this isn't a surprise, but also just a very good kind of a salt of the earth type of guy. Minnesotan. I will never forget, and then we'll shut up. But after that, he gets the double play in game 2 against Toronto, and he comes up to me and he, I had a funny interaction with him, but we also just interviewed him, I think, after that, or maybe we interviewed him in Houston before game 1 in Houston. Either way, little scrum with a handful of reporters, and I was really struck by what it meant to him to be part of the team that broke this god-awful, 0-18 streak, 20-plus year streak, to not only be a part of it, because, he's truly a Minnesota guy. He's a lifelong Twins fan. This was his team always. And to not only be a part of it, but to get a big double play in the game that clinched the first series. It really, I felt like I was talking to a fan who had won a contest to play on the team, and then been so much better than anybody ever could have imagined, and turned out to be a key contributor. And it was very, he's not a super emotional guy or anything, but it was very fun to watch him kind of bask in it, and how much pride he had and satisfaction. And so I thought that was something that
he was 15, 16 years old when that streak started.
Yes.
And so he was 4 or 5 years old when the Twins won their second World Series. It's got to be cool to be on that side of it. That is truly a dream come true. So it's cool.
I remember, after they won the first game versus Toronto, to just snap the 0-for-18, and I don't think he pitched in the first game, if I remember, but he was in the clubhouse afterward, and somebody asked him about breaking the streak, and he said, "Believe me, I know about the streak. It was horrible. I watched the whole thing." His point was yeah, I've been here for it. So I don't know. It was cool. We will be, I don't know when we'll be back. I might do some kind of Patreon. Obviously, if the Twins actually do anything above the let's call it the Gasper line, anything above the Gasper line, we'll either get together, or I will do some kind of solo, or maybe with a different guest, to break that down. I'm not necessarily counting on that. So I guess I'll decide. I could do some kind of mailbag, maybe an Aaron only mailbag. I can give my real unfiltered opinion about
thoughts.
John.
I love that idea. Yeah. Otherwise, we're probably going to be back, I think, a week from Tuesday, the 14th, I think, is when we'll be recording another free podcast. Sponsored by our sponsors, who today included Raycon and Hims and Acorns. And then our, special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Black Stack Brewing. It's now being distributed to all of Greater Minnesota. Just, stop by your favorite liquor store or the Black Stack Tap Room and grab your favorite brew, or try something new. I'm especially a big fan of the local 755. Yeah. So we will probably be back to you talking to you on the free podcast a little over a week and a half, but we hope to have some news. And if so, join us on the Patreon. You're going to love it.
Last but not least, John, for my birthday, are you willing to say once and for all on the record that I am the normal human being?
Absolutely not. We will talk to you again.
Maybe next year.
Bye.
Gleeman